The man sitting across the table in the Gestapo regional headquarters in Oslo on the 14th of March 1942 is 31 years old, medium height, unremarkable in every detail that a trained interrogator looks for. No nervous tics, no sweat on his upper lip, no eyes moving to exits. He has given his name as Erik Andersen. He works, he says, in warehouse logistics near the harbour. He was picked up in a sweep of a café that the Sicherheitsdienst has been watching for 3 weeks, one of 42 men and women brought in that afternoon and processed through rooms smelling of cigarette smoke and industrial disinfectant. The interrogating officer, a Hauptsturmführer from Hamburg, whose name appears in post-war Allied records as Brandt, finds nothing. The documentation is in order. The cover story is internally consistent. The man's hands, when Brandt studies them during a pause in the questions, are calloused in the way that warehouse workers' hands are calloused. There is grease under 2 fingernails. When Brandt asks him to explain his movements on the previous Tuesday, he does so without hesitation, describing streets and buildings that Brandt's local knowledge confirms exist in the precise arrangement the man describes. Erik Andersen is released at 11:40 that evening. He walks out through the side entrance of the building, turns north and does not look back. His real name is Gunnar Sønsteby. He is, by the spring of 1942, already the most active saboteur in the Norwegian resistance. He will become, by general historical consensus, the most decorated Norwegian citizen of the 20th century. He will be hunted by the Gestapo for 4 consecutive years, moving through an occupied city with a price on his name, working under at least a dozen different identities, directing operations that destroy printing presses, blow up labor registration offices, derail trains carrying strategic ore, and eventually set fire to a building full of conscription records that saves 10,000 Norwegian men from forced labor in German factories. He will not be caught. He will not leave Norway. He will be there in Oslo, present and operational when the German occupation ends in May 1945. The same city, the same streets, the same cafés and backstreets, 4 years older and carrying inside him a knowledge of what it costs to remain invisible in a city that is trying to find you. This is the story of how he does it. It is a story told in fragments, in Gestapo dossiers that accumulate incorrect information about a man who keeps changing, in resistance dispatches that describe operations without naming their planner, in post-war testimony given to Allied intelligence officers in rooms that feel safe for the first time in years. The records do not agree on everything, dates conflict, names are redacted or wrong. But the shape of the story is clear, and the shape is this: one man against an apparatus of state terror in a city that knows him and could give him up at any moment, surviving through a combination of discipline, intelligence, audacity, and the quiet solidarity of ordinary people who decide, at no small personal risk, not to say what they see. Norway falls in 62 days. The German invasion begins on the 9th of April 1940, with simultaneous landings at every major port along the Norwegian coast, and by the middle of June, the last organized Norwegian military resistance north of the Arctic Circle has collapsed. King Haakon VII has left for exile in London aboard a British cruiser, and a population of 3 million people wakes to find itself administered by a Reich Commissariat under Josef Terboven, a Gauleiter with a reputation for brutality even by the standards of occupied Europe. Terboven's governing style is not nuanced. He arrests people, he shoots people, he institutes collective punishment. If a German soldier is attacked in a Norwegian community, the community pays in arrests, confiscations, and executions. He understands that terror, applied consistently and disproportionately, is a form of governance, and he is, initially, largely correct. The Norwegian population is shocked into a stunned compliance that the Germans interpret as acceptance. Gunnar Sønsteby is 29 years old when Germany invades. He is born on the 11th of January 1925. Wait, the records say 1918. He is born in Ryukan, a small town in Telemark, the kind of Norwegian industrial community built around a single large employer. In this case, the Norsk hydro-electrochemical plant, which will become, within a few years, the most important industrial sabotage target in the entire European theatre of operations. He has been a competitive skier since childhood, which in Norway means he has been a serious athlete since he could walk, and the physical discipline of cross-country skiing in the mountains above Rjukan will prove, when the occupation comes, to be not a recreational habit but a survival infrastructure. He is working in Oslo in clerical and business roles when the invasion begins. He watches the German troops enter the city. He watches the Norwegian flags come down from the public buildings and the German flags go up. He does what a great many Norwegians do in April and May of 1940. He goes home, goes to work, tries to understand what has happened to his country, and decides, without drama, without a defining moment, he will later be able to identify clearly for historians that he is not going to accept it. The Norwegian resistance in its early form is less an organization than an attitude, an accumulation of individual refusals that have not yet found their structure. In the autumn of 1940, Sønsteby makes contact with a nascent resistance cell in Oslo. The networks at this point are improvised, compartmentalized poorly, connected through personal relationships that the Gestapo will eventually learn to exploit. They distribute illegal newspapers, the underground press that becomes, across occupied Norway, one of the most important instruments of psychological resistance, a daily demonstration that the occupation cannot control what people think. They collect information about German troop movements and disposition and try to get it to London. They help people escape. Jews, military officers, men whose names appear on Gestapo lists across the Swedish border, which is porous in places and which Sweden, officially neutral, does not patrol with the enthusiasm the Germans would prefer. Sønsteby is good at this. He is good at it in ways that are not entirely explicable, even in retrospect, even in his own post-war memoirs, which are notably understated about his personal qualities in the manner of men who learned, during 4 years of clandestine work, to regard self-advertisement as a form of suicide. What the records suggest is that he has a specific and innate competence for the central problem of resistance work in an occupied city. The problem of appearing to belong to the world he is deceiving. He does not look like what the Gestapo, in its training manuals and its profiling documents, has decided resistance operatives look like. He does not carry himself with the particular tension that men under extreme stress tend to carry. He learns, or perhaps always knew. Perhaps it comes from some combination of the skier's physical self-command and whatever particular configuration of personality produces this kind of man, to be, in any given room, the least interesting person present. He makes contact in 1941 with the Special Operations Executive, the British organization created by Churchill's directive to set Europe ablaze, through networks that connect Oslo's underground to London via Sweden and Scotland. The SOE has been working to build Norwegian networks since late 1940, coordinating with the Norwegian government in exile under King Haakon in London, supplying agents by parachute and submarine to the Norwegian coast, and receiving in return intelligence that shapes British strategic planning for the entire northern theatre of the war. The Norwegian SOE section, known as the Linge Company after its original commander Martin Linge, who is killed in a commando raid on Moløy in December 1941, becomes the primary link between the Oslo resistance and London. Sønsteby becomes one of the most important nodes in that link. His codename is Kjakan. It is the Norwegian word for the jaw, specifically the jaw of a person who talks. The irony is intentional. Kjakan does not talk. Kjakan is the last person who talks. The documentation of his early operations is incomplete, as the documentation of any effective clandestine operation will be. The less that is written down, the less there is to find if you are caught. What can be established from cross-referencing the SOE files opened in London, the Gestapo records captured at the end of the war, and the post-war testimony assembled by Norwegian historians is that by the end of 1941, Sønsteby is running courier routes between Oslo and the Swedish border, moving intelligence documents and occasionally people, covering distances that take him through German checkpoints multiple times per week. He uses a succession of cover identities, each one supported by documentation that the resistance has become progressively more skilled at producing. The papers are not always perfect. They do not need to be. They need to be good enough for the particular checkpoint on the particular road at the particular time, and the accumulated knowledge of which checkpoints are staffed, by which guards, with which habits, becomes itself a form of intelligence that the network maintains and updates. The Gestapo is not a monolith. This is the first thing that needs to be understood about surviving it. It is an organization composed of men, some of them trained, some of them intelligent, some of them both, who operate under bureaucratic constraints, information asymmetries, and institutional rivalries that their terrifying reputation tends to obscure. The Oslo Gestapo in the early occupation years is understaffed for the scale of its surveillance mission. It relies heavily on informants, Norwegians who, for a combination of ideological, financial, and personal reasons, provide information about their neighbors and acquaintances. These informants are, from the Gestapo's perspective, both its greatest intelligence resource and its greatest vulnerability. They lie, they exaggerate, they pursue personal grudges, they fabricate information when they have nothing useful to report and are afraid to say so. A substantial proportion of the arrests made in Norway in 1941 and 1942 are the product of informant reports that are partly or wholly false, which means that a substantial proportion of the Gestapo's investigative resources are devoted to people who turn out to have nothing to do with the resistance and who are eventually released, often having been tortured for information they do not have. Sønsteby understands this asymmetry. He understands that the Gestapo's picture of the resistance is necessarily fragmentary, assembled from pieces of information that do not connect because the resistance has been deliberately designed to prevent connection. The cells he operates in and eventually leads are compartmentalized. Each person knows the minimum required to carry out their function and no more. A courier knows the drop point, but not the recipient. A safe housekeeper knows the code name of the operative she is sheltering, but not his real identity. A document forger knows that documents are needed for a certain specification, but not what operation they will support. If any one of these people is caught, the information they can provide is limited. It cannot unravel the whole because no single person knows the whole. This architecture of ignorance is not, in occupied Norway, the product of some sophisticated tradecraft manual dropped from a London aircraft. It emerges from experience, specifically from the experience of what happens when networks are not compartmentalized, when people know each other's real names, when a single arrest produces the names and addresses necessary for a second arrest, which produces the information for a third, the chain of betrayal and destruction running until an entire network is gone. The early Norwegian resistance suffers these cascades. The records are full of them, sudden, total destructions of groups that had been operational for months, triggered by a single captured courier or a single informant's report. The survivors learn. Compartmentalization is not a theory. It is what you do when you have watched what happens to people who do not. By the spring of 1942, the spring of the Gestapo interrogation that opens this story, the spring of the unremarkable man named Erik Andersen, who is released at 11:40 in the evening. Sønsteby's network is beginning to mature into something more capable than an information collection and escape operation. London wants action. The SOE's mandate is not intelligence gathering. That is MI6's domain. And the relationship between the two organizations is not always cordial. The SOE wants to blow things up. It wants to interfere with German logistics, destroy infrastructure, disrupt production, create the constant low-grade insecurity that forces an occupying power to divert resources from the front to the rear. It wants Norway to be, in Churchill's phrase, a running saw. What Norway becomes, with Sønsteby's network as one of its primary instruments, is precisely that. The operations are not dramatic in the way that the Telemark heavy water sabotage, the destruction of the Norsk Hydro heavy water facility at Vemork in February 1943, arguably the most strategically significant act of sabotage in the entire European resistance war, is dramatic. They are smaller, more frequent, more precisely targeted. A German administrative building in Oslo finds that its filing system has been comprehensively destroyed overnight. The index cards that the Reichskommissariat uses to track Norwegian workers scattered and burned. A printing press used to produce German propaganda is disabled by sugar introduced into its lubricating system. Simple, untraceable, effective. A shipment of high-grade Norwegian iron ore moving south by rail develops an inexplicable mechanical problem that delays it for 4 days, which, in the context of German industrial scheduling, causes knock-on effects that historians are still tracing decades later. The labor registration operation is the one that Sønsteby himself identifies in his post-war testimony as the most significant of his career. In the winter of 1943 to 1944, the German administration in Norway begins preparations for a major expansion of forced labor. The Arbeidstjenesten, the labor service, has been compulsory for young men since 1941. But the Wehrmacht's manpower crisis in the east is driving demands for Norwegian workers in German factories, mines, and construction projects. The administrative mechanism for this expansion is a comprehensive census. Every Norwegian male between certain ages must register, providing personal details, professional skills, and current employment. The completed registration forms are gathered at regional offices, organized and transferred to central files. When those files are complete, the lists of names they contain will be used to issue conscription notices. The system is bureaucratic and relatively slow, but it is thorough, and the men whose names are on those lists will have no way of knowing until the notice arrives. Sønsteby's network determines which buildings hold the registration files, which nights the guard shifts change, which routes the file transfers take between regional and central offices. The planning takes weeks. The operation, when it executes, takes approximately 90 minutes. A team enters the central registration office in Oslo through a back entrance, having dealt with the guard shift in a way the surviving records describe only as neutralized without lethal force. They locate the filing system. They destroy it, not partially, completely. The index, the cross-references, the backup copies stored in a secondary location that the network has identified and accounted for. The fires are set carefully in a sequence designed to ensure complete destruction before the alarm can be raised and the fire brigade can respond. The German administration's reaction is fury, followed by the administrative reality that the destroyed records cannot be reconstructed quickly enough to meet the conscription timetable. By historians' estimates, the destruction of those files delays the forced labor program in Norway by months and renders it impossible to implement in its planned scope. The number of Norwegians who escape compulsory German factory work as a direct consequence is estimated at something between 8 and 10,000. The estimate varies by source and by methodology. What does not vary is the operational fact. The files are gone, and without the files, the system cannot function. The question the Gestapo is asking through all of this is who? Not in an abstract sense. They know the resistance exists. They know it is connected to London. They have captured enough couriers and network members to assemble a partial picture of how it is structured. But the specific question, who plans these operations, who coordinates them, whose signature is recognizable in the way they are conceived and executed, remains unanswered. The dossier they build over 4 years contains, at various points, 9 different names for the same man. It contains photographs of several of those names' cover identities that, examined together now, are clearly the same face, but were not recognized as such because each identity inhabited a different administrative context, a different district, a different set of associated records. The Gestapo's information management system, which relies on paper files organized by name rather than by physiognomy, has no mechanism for connecting Erik Andersen of warehouse logistics to Kjell Hansen, the bicycle repairman, to the various other identities Sønsteby moves through over the course of the occupation. He changes his appearance within the narrow parameters available without access to theatrical facilities. He grows and removes a mustache on a cycle timed to his identity changes. He alters his haircut and its color in small increments. He wears glasses with different frames. These are not disguises in any dramatic sense. They are adjustments. But the Gestapo is working from verbal descriptions and crude photographs, and an adjustment that would be immediately transparent to someone who knows the man is sufficient to confound a file system that has never seen him in person. The safe houses are the infrastructure of his invisibility. Over 4 years, Sønsteby moves through more than 30 different addresses in Oslo, never staying long enough in any single location to become a fixture, never using the same house twice if it has been compromised or if the operational situation suggests risk. The people who shelter him are not, in most cases, trained resistance members. They are ordinary Norwegians, teachers, shopkeepers, housewives, factory workers, who have made the decision, at a cost they understand clearly, to provide a room and silence. The penalties for harboring a resistance operative are severe and are applied without hesitation. The people who shelter Sønsteby know this. They shelter him anyway. This is the element of the story that Sønsteby himself returns to most often in his post-war accounts, not the operations, not the Gestapo interrogations, not the close calls and narrow escapes that the narrative structure of a resistance story tends to emphasize. He returns to the ordinary people, the woman who gives him a bed and asks no questions and leaves a plate of food outside the door and does not go to the police when the Gestapo comes asking about the neighborhood. The man who stores documents in the lining of his coat for 3 weeks because Sønsteby needs them stored, somewhere that is not where he himself is sleeping. The child who, when a German soldier asks at a doorstep if anyone unusual has been seen in the building, says no with the particular blank sincerity of a child who has been taught very carefully what it means to say the wrong thing. The resistance's intelligence about the Gestapo's movements and investigations becomes, over time, itself a source of operational advantage. The Oslo police, compulsorily integrated into the German administrative apparatus, but in practice a body of men with varying degrees of commitment to that integration, contains individuals who pass information to the resistance about impending raids, about informants whose names the Gestapo is running, about the status of investigations that concern resistance networks. This information is not reliable. It is necessarily fragmentary, filtered through individuals whose own position makes precision impossible. But even fragmentary advance warning of a Gestapo operation is the difference, sometimes, between an empty safe house and an occupied one when the knock comes at the door. In the spring of 1944, the Gestapo comes close. Closer than it has come before. A courier is arrested in April carrying documentation that, despite the compartmentalization protocols, contains enough information to allow the Gestapo investigators to construct a partial map of the network's Oslo structure. 3 safe houses are raided within 48 hours. 2 resistance members are arrested. They are taken to Møllergata 19, the Oslo prison where the Gestapo conducts its interrogations, and they do not come out. What happens to them in those rooms is not recorded in any document that has survived, which is its own form of record. What is recorded is that Sønsteby is not at any of the 3 addresses when the raids occur. He is warned by one of the police sources approximately 6 hours before the first raid. He moves. He does not go to Sweden. He moves to a new address in a different district of Oslo and continues operating. The near miss of April 1944 produces a reorganization. Networks that have been compromised are rebuilt on new lines, with new personnel in key positions and new protocols for communication. The delay is approximately 6 weeks. 6 weeks in which certain operations that had been planned are suspended, certain contacts are broken, certain couriers take longer routes between points, and then, by June 1944, the network is operational again. Sønsteby is still in Oslo. He is still Kjakan. He is working. The German occupation of Norway is, measured by the standards of the occupied territories of continental Europe, not the worst. This needs to be said clearly because it matters for understanding the particular character of what Sønsteby and the resistance are doing. Norway is not Poland. The racial ideology that drives the German administration in the East, the Untermenschen categorization that makes mass murder not just permissible but mandatory, does not apply to Norwegians, who the Nazis class as racial kin, Germanic stock worthy of assimilation into the new European order. The occupation's policy objective is not extermination, but incorporation. Norwegian resources, iron ore, fish, hydroelectric power, shipping, are to be integrated into the German war economy. Norwegian men are to be persuaded, and failing persuasion, compelled to serve German industrial and military needs. Norwegian society is to be reshaped gradually according to the National Socialist model, with Vidkun Quisling's National Samling Party installed as the instrument of this reshaping. This does not mean the occupation is gentle. Teboven's methods are not gentle. Norwegian Jews are deported, 773 of them transported to Auschwitz on the ship Gotenland in November 1942, of whom 34 survived the war. Norwegian resistance members are arrested, tortured, and executed. The Nakke and Nabel, Night and Fog decree means that Norwegians taken by the Gestapo can simply disappear, with no notification to their families, no records accessible to Red Cross inspection, no evidence that they ever existed except the absence of them. This instrument of disappearance is applied in Norway with bureaucratic thoroughness. What the occupation's relatively privileged character creates, paradoxically, is a resistance culture of unusual breadth and social depth. Because ordinary Norwegians are not facing the immediate physical annihilation that faces Poles or Soviet citizens under German occupation, the calculus of resistance and collaboration is different. The risk of helping a resistance operative is real and severe, but it is not, in most cases, certain death. People can make the calculation that the risk is acceptable, and a great many of them make it. The illegal press circulates through networks of distribution that involve thousands of ordinary Norwegians who know that they are breaking the law and who do it anyway. The escape routes to Sweden move not just resistance fighters, but anyone who needs to cross: Jewish families, draft evaders, political targets, and they run through farms and houses and boats whose owners have decided to be part of something. The solidarity is not unanimous. There are informers, collaborators, men and women who choose the other side for reasons that are not all venal or cowardly. Some of them ideological, some of them pragmatic, some of them simply terrified. But the solidarity is wide, and it is this width, this distributed commitment spread across a population rather than concentrated in a professional underground, that makes Sønsteby's survival possible. He cannot survive without the woman who leaves the food outside the door. He cannot survive without the policeman who passes the 6-hour warning. He cannot survive without the forger who produces the documents, or the shopkeeper who provides the bicycle, or the factory worker who agrees to be, on a specific Tuesday at a specific time, the man standing at the corner of a specific street to signal that the route is clear. The Gestapo is looking for one man. What it is actually confronting is a city that has decided, in thousands of small and individual ways, to make him unfindable. The liberation comes in May 1945. German forces in Norway capitulate on the 8th of May, the same day as the general German capitulation, and the Wehrmacht begins its administrative handover to Norwegian authorities in a process that takes several weeks and is, by the standards of occupied Europe, relatively orderly. Terboven, who has promised that he will not be taken alive, kills himself with dynamite at his residence at Skogum on the 9th of May. His death removes the principal architect of the occupation's brutality before he can be brought to trial, a fact that will irritate Norwegian prosecutors for years. Gunnar Sønsteby is in Oslo when the war ends. He has been in Oslo for the entire occupation, with brief operational trips to London and Stockholm and crossings to Sweden, but essentially present, essentially in the city, essentially functional as an operative until the last moment. The Gestapo file on him, reconstructed from the records captured at Victoria Terrasse, the Gestapo headquarters in Oslo, and cross-referenced with the records of the Sikkerhetsdienst regional office, contains 9 different names and is internally inconsistent in ways that suggest it has never been consolidated into a single working picture of a single individual. There is a photograph taken during the Gestapo sweep of March 1942, the sweep from which Erik Andersen is released at 11:40 in the evening. That shows a man of medium height and unremarkable features looking at the camera with an expression that the post-war analysis of resistance photography tends to describe, somewhat inadequately, as neutral. It is the expression of a man who has decided, consciously and completely, to give nothing away. He is awarded the War Cross with 2 swords by the Norwegian government, the highest military decoration Norway confers. He receives the British Distinguished Service Medal. He receives, eventually, so many decorations from so many countries that the official count reaches more than 20 national honours. He is the most decorated Norwegian citizen of the 20th century, possibly of any century. He lives until the 29th of May 2012, dying at the age of 94 in Oslo, the city he refused to leave, the city that refused to give him up. In his memoir, published in Norwegian in 1960 under the title Rapport fra nummer 24, Report from Number 24, he describes the experience of the occupation with a compression and understatement that is itself a kind of style, a continuation of the same discipline that kept him alive through 4 years of being hunted. He does not dwell on the close calls. He does not elevate himself into the hero that the decorations imply. He returns again and again to the ordinary people, the ones who opened their doors, the ones who did not open their mouths, the ones whose names are not in the history books because they did not do the things that get into history books. They simply did not betray a man they knew could be betrayed. There is a Gestapo report dated the 22nd of November 1943 that refers to the unknown operative identified by the codename Kjakan as the most dangerous individual in the Oslo resistance network. The report assesses his likely age as between 35 and 45, his likely background as either military or criminal, his likely base of operations as the Aker or Grünerløkka districts of the city. All 3 assessments are wrong. He is 25 years old. He is a former clerical worker who grew up in Rjukan. He is operating from a flat in Frogner, 3 kilometers from where the Gestapo report places him. The Gestapo's picture of the man it is hunting is not a picture of Gunnar Sønsteby. It is a picture assembled from fragments of wrong information, informant reports of uneven reliability, and a set of assumptions about what a resistance operative must be like. Assumptions derived from captured operatives who were not very good at their work, who were caught for the same reasons that professionals in any field get caught. Carelessness, bad luck, and the particular failure of discipline that comes from believing briefly that you are safe. The picture in the Gestapo file has the general shape of a dangerous man, but none of the specific details. The man it describes does not exist. The man it is looking for is sitting in a cafe on Karl Johans Gate, reading a newspaper, waiting for the right time to leave. He orders a second coffee. The waiter does not give him a second look. He finishes it slowly, folds the newspaper and walks out into the Oslo morning, which is cold and bright and exactly like the other mornings, the other cafés, the other newspapers, the other moments of sustained ordinary invisibility that have kept him alive in an occupied city for 4 years, moving through German checkpoints and Gestapo sweeps, and informant networks and all the machinery of a state whose entire purpose is to make him findable. They do not find him. The city holds. If this story hit you, like and subscribe. We find these forgotten stories every single day. Gunnar Sønsteby is the most decorated Norwegian of the 20th century, and most people outside Norway have never heard his name. Why do you think resistance operatives like him remain unknown, while generals and admirals fill the history books? And watch this next video. You are not going to believe what these men did.